It's okay. Assalamualaikum. I guess we should start from right back at the start as to when you first started writing, really, and how you got into poetry in general.
I'm always a bit stumped with this question because I never felt like I wasn't writing poetry. It was always this space that I went to make sense of what was happening in my life or the world. And so, my first poems were exclusively about dragons. I don't know why, but they were. And then, of course, when, as they often do, Muslim women tend to be the focus of one news segment or the other. And I saw one in particular that talked about how Muslim women don't integrate enough and aren't part of British society. And, anyone who is a Muslim woman or has Muslim women around them knows just how ridiculous that kind of statement is. And so I was like, oh gosh, I just need to do something. So I wrote something, and then someone said, oh, why don't you share that? And I'd never kind of done that. I only really shared poems for, like if it was someone's birthday or a wedding or something like that. And so I did. I put it on Facebook because Facebook, I don't know if anyone still remembers it. People it seemed to resonate. I mean, it was really badly written, I gotta say. But so that idea of kind of sharing your sort of frustrations through creativity was what sparked it for me.
I hugely relate to that. Like, I think poetry is one of those ways where it's like, because you can miss words out in poems, you can like shorten it, but it's a really deep way to convey some things that you may not be able to explain on an everyday level, just like in a conversation. But I'm really glad that someone came to you and said, you should share that. Because I think that we don't often get told to do that, or those opportunities to do that. Like, how did that feel initially for somebody to just reach out and be like, you should do that?
Yeah, like you said, I do feel grateful to have had, that person who said, oh, this could resonate with other people. And I hope that I'm now that person, because something that I'm really passionate about is encouraging people to just take that step. And every year I kind of try and have a little, I don't want to say mantra because that feels a bit appropriate, but like a sort of a phrase that I use, and that was, why not? And that's really carried me through a lot of things. Why not? Like, the worst that's going to happen is that it won't happen, or they'll say no, or, so why not?
Yeah. You mentioned some of the themes, like taking your frustrations and then putting it in a poem. Like, where do you draw your inspiration from? I know that can be a bit of a funny question sometimes, because most people like everything. But like, do you have like a general theme that you try to follow? Like, how do you know that, okay, do you know what, this is something worth that I need to put down on paper and publish?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I'm always sort of like, what do I say when people ask that? One of my favourite quotes about poetry is that it's by Octavio Paz, and he says that the poem is a constellation of blood. And one of the meanings that I've sort of taken from that is that the poem becomes a guide to yourself, to your truth. And so whether it's a commission that someone's approached me for, or if it's, like you said, something that I want to just put out in the world, it starts from a place of what's moving me about this. What is it that's moving me? And that's kind of been a good thing for me to follow, because it makes sure that I've started in a place of authenticity. And I'll be honest, I've had commissions that I've been like, what am I going to write about? Like, I always use this as an example. I call it the porcupine poem. So I was approached by a poetry festival, and they said, we're going to give poets an art piece from an exhibition, and we'd like you to write a poem in response. So I said, great, and I thought that they were going to give me like a painting of a landscape or something. I got a stuffed porcupine, and I was just like, wow, what the hell am I going to do with this? How am I going to write a poem about? So yeah, I went back to that idea of what's moving me, how can I sort of connect with this? And so I did some research into porcupines, and I found similarities between myself and, so for example, the nocturnal, I'm sure a lot of writers can relate to the fact that that's when frustratingly, you get a lot of your sort of ideas. But also, I think the bit that struck me the most was their ability to kind of, when they feel threatened, when they feel vulnerable, to kind of turn in on themselves and to protect themselves. And even, I'd like to think that I don't literally have spikes to keep people away, but yeah, so it's that idea of kind of protecting yourself by turning inwards. And so that's where I started from, is that was for me a sort of authentic connection. And I tell you what, I have had 2 subsequent payments for that poem. So always make sure you write the porcupine poem, seriously.
Wow, okay, I didn't expect that as a source of inspiration when I was asking that question.
Yeah.
But I mean, as a follow-up on that, is there anything you feel like you've been pressured to write about as a Muslim woman, specifically around identity? And because I know I've had this internal battle of like, well, I'm a Muslim woman and I'm from Wales, therefore I should write about things to do with Muslim women in Wales. So as like for yourself, like have you had that dilemma internally or externally, especially when you're writing for publish and like you're writing something that goes out into the world and there's not many people like us in those spaces? Like, do you feel a pressure to write about things?
Yeah, absolutely, all the time. But I think that it's a privilege of a poet to be provocative, so you don't have to necessarily write the correct thing. So when I started, obviously, like I said, it was very much, the first piece that I put out was very much about identity and a Muslim woman. And so, but what I found is that was the only thing that people were asking me to write about. And as I'm sure you'll know, as creatives in the audience will know, like, you get bored writing about any one thing. You want to write about the rain and you want to write about kittens and all sorts, as well as the big questions. And so, I'm very mindful of a Toni Morrison quote where she says that racism is a distraction. It distracts you from the work. And I really found that true, because when you're constantly asked to explain your identity and write about your identity constantly, it is kind of it puts a stopper on you creating anything naturally about anything else. But yeah, so I think, there is a kind of internal struggle, but it's just about getting that balance right, I think, and again taking it to a point of authenticity for yourself.
Yeah, I think I wish someone told me that when I was younger, like even younger, like, because
you're still so young.
Because like genuinely, when you want to write a piece, you're also taught like readership and selling and like the money element, and it's like poems about racism sell well. It's like, so it's like it is a bit of a dilemma. It's like, okay, who am I going to be seen as? Like, I think, yeah, those are questions that often I've faced as well. So yeah, it's I like the point that you made about how it can curb you actually as a creative.
Yeah, the only thing that I would add to that is I would never write something because I think it's going to sell. Only because, and I know that it is a pressure, but you will know, other writers in the audience know, we do not do this for the money. Like, I wish, we all were able to sustain ourselves on it, but like literally, like I think the latest statistics show that the average sort of earnings of authors have actually decreased, not increased. So yeah, none of us are in this for the money. So yeah, I think it's important to make sure that what you're writing comes from what's moving you. Yeah,
that's a really good advice. And yeah, I mean, when you put it in that perspective, it's like, yeah, of course, like why am I even gonna go there in that economical aspect? Moving forward, tell us about your journey into being the National Poet of Wales. So where did that come from? What was that process? How did it start? Like, yeah, take us back.
Light came down from the sky. full transparency, I'm the first national poet that has had to go through an application, interview, selection process. Previous to myself, I know I've got all the luck, but previous to myself, they would just kind of have a list of names of people that were known for their work and that were prominent in the sort of literary scene, and they would just kind of tap them on the shoulder and say, what do you think? And so, yeah, I mean, the process of going through an application and then subsequent interviews and that, it was, I mean, you know, we've all been through it, interviewing for a job and things like that, but honestly, I am rubbish at interviews. Like, I am so bad. But this one, and it was on Zoom, so all of the social awkwardness times 100, 6 people asking me questions, and yet I felt like every question, I knew what I was going to say, and I've never had that before. So I guess it was
meant to be, yeah. And what does it mean when, like, what did it mean for you when actually you got that message back? It's like, yes, you're it, that's it. You're the National Poet of Wales. Like, how did it feel for you?
I was speechless. I was in the car with my husband. We were driving, and I had to pull over to answer the call. And they sort of said, "Oh, we'd like to let you know that you're the next national poet." And I couldn't speak, and my husband was like, "Yeah!" And he was like, "She is here, she's listening, but she's not saying anything, so I'm saying thank you for letting us know." You know, like that. But yeah, and it did take quite a while to be like, oh my God, like this is real. Like, and it's incredibly humbling to. I think the inner child remembering being that sort of little nerdy writer girl with notebooks and notebooks full of poems, again, dragon poems. I never imagined that this is where I would be. So yeah, it's incredibly humbling and exciting.
And afterwards, I noticed that there was a lot of press coverage, and the profile of the position, like it went viral, to be honest. And how was that? How was it receiving that? Like, what did you think about the response? And because there was a few different reactions to becoming the National Poet.
So Literature Wales is the sort of organisational body that chooses and then runs the project, runs me basically. And they were phenomenal in sort of preparing me for the worst, I guess. And I genuinely was expecting to have like a big backlash, like, oh my gosh, this visibly Muslim woman is now the National Poet of Wales. I don't know why I'm doing that, it is. And it just never came. I just got this waves of warmth, waves of excitement, waves of congratulations and joy. And it was wonderful. And a lot of people loved the photo shoot that I did. And it was so funny because Literature Wales, you know, like for the authors here, you'll know if you want to get author photos done, they say, oh, let's go to the park, or this is a nice brick wall, we'll take a picture. And I was like, we're not doing that. I was like, no. I was like, I have a plan. I have had a plan since I was 10. This is what we shall do. We will go to the Arab Room in Cardiff Castle. Please make it happen. And then I've loved the folklore tale of Blodeuwydd in the Mabinogion for ages. So I was like, this needs to happen. And I found this wonderful woman who, her name's Grace, Flowers by Grace, if you're interested. And I sort of sent her some inspiration, and I said, this is what I want to do. And she was like, whoa, okay, I am going to need help. And literally the cape that I wore, it was all fresh flowers, all locally grown, and it weighed a ton. It was, do you remember? You tried to hold it, isn't it? You couldn't. It was so heavy, but yeah, it was great to feel like I was sort of paying homage to. I think, is that from the Arab Room? Yeah, you know. So this image on the poster is the ceiling. It's a phenomenal space. If you haven't visited it, please go and visit it. So yeah, I just felt like a really great way to sort of pay homage to my heritage in the different ways.
I really liked the thought that was put into that photo shoot, and how, because with media and like we covered it on Now in a Minute as well, it was a really great talking point, like the sourcing of the flowers, the significance of the space, and I'm really glad that you did that because, yeah, otherwise it would have been really boring, first of all. But also, I just think that like it shows your attention to detail and actually your passion and enthusiasm within the role. But I think we're at like are you a year into?
No. So I was appointed in July.
In July.
So, yeah.
Okay.
Half a year.
It's like, oh yeah, it's not. But how has it been so far? And is there anything that you found in the role that surprised you? Like in terms of conversations that you've had, because I know you've been traveling a bit. So yeah, tell us a bit about your journey so far.
I think what has surprised me is the lack of pushback. Like, it's funny because, like I said, I just had this incredible like warmth and joy that, you know, people sort of passed on to me. So when I did see these kind of blips of people writing racist things or Islamophobic things, like people would write things like Hanan Issa, that famous Welsh name, and things like that. I just thought it was hilarious. So I'd like screenshot them and be like, yeah, what I would really love is, I was actually hoping to get more because then I could like print them and make a dress out of them or something. So, but it didn't happen. So, you know, they stumped my creativity there. Yeah. But yeah, so that surprised me in a good way, I guess. The bits that I'm truly loving is the people that are reaching out to me about how my work is inspiring their work. So there was a school, I think it was Rada Primary School, and the kids had watched a short poetry film that I made with the National Dance Company Wales. So I worked with a dancer, and we developed a piece that was a poem and a dance film. And she's half Arab and half Welsh as well. And so the title is Ble Mai Biledi, which is where is my place, where is my home, where is my space. And they wrote their own versions and they shared them. I was tearing up reading them. I was like, oh my God, this is incredible. And I just yesterday spoke to someone who's studying a master's in a university in Iraq, and they're looking at some of my poetry, and that's just like, because they want to write about the convergence of cultures. And so that's like, it's hard to grasp that.
It's almost like a full circle.
Exactly.
So yeah, that's beautiful and that's crazy, and I hope like more people do that, because I really like it when people find inspiration, they actually go up to the person who wrote it and say, yeah, you really inspired me. Like, I think that's a really beautiful circle. But yeah, in terms of like industry, so before you had this role, you were kind of a poet that was writing on the outside, and now you're fully kind of immersed in the industry. Has your perspective on the arts scene and the arts industry in Wales changed? What are your thoughts about the scene in Wales of the art and the creative industry?
When you say I'm in it, do you mean I had to like go in a robe and eat a chicken and live? And I don't know, like. So it's a funny one because the publishing industry is so convoluted, and there is a lot of gatekeeping that goes on, and a lot of the kind of the rubbish that is out there in the way that writers get treated only happens because it's behind closed doors. So because a publisher holds the power and a writer doesn't want to burn a bridge with a publisher. So I think it is important to have more kind of transparency, more open conversations. But there's definitely a change happening within the publishing industry in terms of representation and the idea that, because a lot of the time you'll hear this again and again, people who've written stories perhaps with a focus on being Muslim or a focus on being from a particular ethnicity that is not particularly well represented. The pushback will be, oh, this won't sell, what you were talking about earlier, or this isn't going to sell. And it is a big thing when you're putting your work out there to be published. You really realize how much of a business it is. But part of that for me is finding an agent who can be your kind of buffer, so you can retain that sense of working on creative, the creative stuff, and maybe the ones that deal with all the kind of the business end of that. But that's a whole other conversation about finding an agent that, believes in the same things as you. And
yeah, I mean, is there something that, aside from that, is there something that you'd like to see more of, or you think that would it'd be a big shift for the industry that you'd like to change within the scene in Wales?
I think in terms of publishing, the publishing scene in Wales, because a lot of the publishers are, they have a lot of funding from Books Council, very often what you'll find is there isn't a massive push to promote and sell the works. And of course, again, like I said, we're not really in this for the money. We know it's not going to make us a ton of money, but we do want our books to sell and we do want people to read them. And so what I'm finding when I'm speaking to other authors, and I did this myself, is you look to publishers outside of Wales, because you know that they're going to be more focused on the promotion and more focused on getting your books into shops, getting your books out there for people to purchase. And so, but then there are publishers that are sort of rising up, like for example, Lucent Dreaming and Hono Press, and who are a little bit more kind of business minded, I guess, in that they want to push that. And I'm not saying that the publishers in Wales don't do that, they do, but I think it's a strange world, the publishing world, and even more so in Wales because it's smaller. So.
Yeah. Speaking of books, you recently wrote an essay on Welsh history and identity in Welsh plural. It's a brilliant book. I recommend everyone to get it. Tell us about why you wrote it, and just a bit about the essay and what you talked about in there.
Yeah, so Welsh plural, and you said recently, it feels like ages ago now, but it's an anthology of essays. And I was one of the co-editors, and what we found was, just within the four of us who are editors, we had such a kind of wealth of different experiences of what it means to be Welsh. So myself, I'm mixed race, I live in Cardiff, and then there's Darren Chetty, who was brought up in Swansea. He's mixed race, but now he lives in London, so he's still got these ties to Wales, but then he's also got the kind of, I'm not living in Wales. And then you've got Greg and Iestyn, who are both Welsh speakers, but Iestyn is from a family of farmers, and then Greg is like half American. So each of us had like a very different experience of Welshness, and then we kind of opened that up and really realised that there is no one way to be Welsh. And so what we got back was just an incredible kind of spectrum of experiences and ideas and opinions on Welshness. And it's wonderful because, when we do events, there's always people who say, I never felt Welsh enough, or I never felt like I could say I was Welsh, and then I read your book. And, so that is wonderful. And for my essay in particular, I started off with, and you've probably heard it before or seen it shared before, is that there's a kind of a small apocryphal story of a woman in niqab on a bus, and she's talking to her child and in a language that isn't English, and someone else on the bus says, "Oi, you're in Britain, you're in England, you should speak in English." And then another person on the bus says, "Leave her alone, she's speaking Welsh and she's in Wales." So I kind of pick apart that sort of story and what are the sort of the pros and cons to a story like that. But then I wanted to really kind of pick at the idea of belonging and how it's tied to aesthetics. Very often, people will we all make assumptions about someone based on what they look like. But just as like that person who put Hanan, Issa, the famous Welsh name, when people look at me, they don't instantly think Welsh because they have an idea of what Welsh looks like. But in the essay, what I tried to talk about was the concept of care, and perhaps we could move away from belonging being so heavily tied to an aesthetic, and belonging being more about how much you care. So I care for this place, I care for these people, therefore I belong, rather than I look like these people, I speak like these people, I do the same things as these people, therefore I belong.
Yeah. Mic drop after that one. Only because I don't actually think that there's any literature, there's a really real lack of literature around the topics that you've just mentioned. And I think even if you're a student, you're trying to reference things and you want to make it locally relevant, the power of just writing and having an anthology like that is great. And I hope to see that. I hope it inspires more people to kind of come together like that.
I've already heard there's going to be a new anthology of essays about identity and Welshness, and there was a poetry anthology called Poems from the A470, and it was great because they got poets to write about different stretches of the A470, and so you got really kind of different stories, all about this road that's very iconic to anyone who drives in Wales. So yeah.
Sounds great. Okay, so I have two questions. Okay, they're kind of similar. The first one is, what legacy would you like to leave as the National Poet of Wales? The second one is, what advice would you give to young people wanting to start poetry?
Oh, that's a big one, legacy. It's what do we, I hope that this, what we've been talking about, the kind of, the idea of paying it forward. So when, that person who kind of gave me that nudge to share, I hope that I am that person for people through my tenure as National Poet. I'd like to think that I kind of opened up the parameters of what a Welsh poet looks like, and I hope that there are little girls and little boys and little people who want to write poetry, and they see me and think, God, I could do that job. If she can do it, I can do that. And what was there about advice?
What advice would you give to someone wanting to start poetry?
Read. Just read. And obviously there's so much poetry out there, and there's so many different types of poetry. Because, I think, I know that there are changes now to the curriculum, but for a long time there was a very sort of narrow idea of poetry being passed, a lot of the time, and it still happens now, people will say to me, when I was in school, the only poems that I sort of came across were Wordsworth poems, or Seamus Heaney, if you're lucky, Seamus Heaney, but now there's so many different types of, even, the spoken word scene, my son, he came home a few times and he's been shown videos of people like Yomi Sode performing, people like Benjamin Zephaniah, so there is definitely something for everyone out there. So yeah, just read and don't be afraid to share your work.
So